Lofi.nites is what they call you on the streets, and and that's where the people can also follow you on Instagram. And I thought it would be dope if I can get an interview with you because you do lo-fi hip hop. Like all you do is post lo-fi hip hop content like 24/7, 365 on your page. So the anime that we actually have in production right now is called 25 cents, and a lot of the music and a lot of the anime as a whole is kind of influenced by lo-fi hip hop. So I thought it would be dope to kind of get your perspective on lo-fi hip hop, like your introduction to it. Let's start there actually. Like what was your introduction into lo-fi hip hop? Like what made you get into it?
I was probably a sophomore, maybe a little bit younger than that in high school. And I just like was into this weird like spiral where I just kind of looked through every music genre I could find, if that makes sense. I don't know if anybody else does that. But I was like just looking through music and I ended up coming across a song called I'm Sorry by Swell. I feel like most people know that song. It's like a very iconic track that I wouldn't really consider lo-fi, but like very similar to lo-fi. And from finding that track and from like very much enjoying that, I decided to just like go as deep as humanly possible into the genre and just find different artists and playlists. And from there, it was like over like an unreal passion that I've never felt for music in my life. Like as a listener and like a lover of music in general, it was it for me. Like I was like, this is my genre. These are my people. Like I feel it. Like.
You said something interesting actually. You said that track that you just mentioned, you said you actually wouldn't consider it lo-fi hip hop or lo-fi. Like so what exactly would you consider lo-fi? And like is lo-fi different from lo-fi hip hop? Are those like two different things?
I always start like I always get that question is like, well, what do you think lo-fi is? Or like what do you consider it? Technically, like if we're being technical, lo-fi comes from like low fidelity audio, which is just an audio quality type. Usually lo-fi is obviously that more like vinyl crackle, white noise kind of sound over top of it. So it sounds older, even if it was made like in 2020, it can sound like it was made obviously way further in the past. But I think a big thing that like makes lo-fi is just the fact that it's homemade music. Because lo-fi has been around for so long. Lo-fi obviously like has been around since probably like the late 70s going into the early 80s especially. So
Seriously?
like lo-fi, because of just the audio quality itself and the fact that it's technically not considered a genre. So it's really interesting when you think about it that way. But like it has a lot of like really unique characteristics that kind of what like show more of the lo-fi as we know it, like lo-fi hip hop, and that would be like obviously down tempo, like I said, the vinyl crackle, white noise, things like that. But a lot of it is like lo-fi is interesting, and lo-fi is so different from a lot of other genres or types of music because people purposely place a lot of different distortions and like weirder things within the music. So it doesn't really come across as like just pop music or just 80s music, or it's kind of like a blend because it sounds like what we would consider air quotes normal music, but with that mix of nostalgia and like purposeful weird distortions.
If you like this, we got a whole lot more. 우린 인스타그램 그게로 환영하세요. 좋아요 버튼 꼭 눌러주세요. Do the unthinkable. Pew pew pew. Go!
I think my next question would be the lo-fi that I know of, and when I think of lo-fi hip hop, and I kind of think of anime mixed with this music that you're talking about. Like that's the very first thing that pops into my head whenever someone mentions lo-fi. So you give me this history lesson of like how long it's been around, and well, that would, if that's the case, then basically what you're saying is it hasn't always been coupled with anime. It hasn't always been paired with the animation. So like, why has that become such a trend over the years?
I think that goes along with like what I was saying about like the generational changes and what we choose to do with it. Going back to like Loser by Beck, he made that in his kitchen. That's considered lo-fi because it's homemade music. And like alternative was like the theme of the 90s. Like everybody wanted to be, grungy and different in that sense. In our generation, I think we have this ability where we're very open and weird and different as like a generation. And I think a lot of those otherworldly scenes and vibes and just like nostalgic feelings you get from anime, like very well, they match extremely well the same otherworldly, dreamy, nostalgic feelings you get from like lo-fi hip hop as we know it. So that's just, I feel like, another way of our generation blending our current culture and what we grew up on. Because I'm 21 years old, so I grew up on like, the start of Toonami, like all the anime, all that kind of stuff. So I think that's a big part of like our generation, the 18 and ups doing, what we saw when we were younger and bringing it into our own world and our own version of that. So
I think about it like this, like, and this is just like my hypothesis, like, so, like, when I think of people like my dad's age, like 40 plus, like, they were really big on Marvel and like comic books and shit like that, and then and it kind of reflects in like the hip hop of that era too, because you think of like MF Doom or whatever, and then when you kind of like link it back to our generation, and when I'm mentioning you, like when I think of lo-fi, like, or when I think of hip hop nowadays, like it's really like kawaii pop. It's got that like that Japanese kind of like hint to it. Like everything is so influenced by Asian culture, especially hip hop nowadays. I feel it's just super interesting to me. Like, so I'm glad you mentioned.
yeah, I mean, I think that's a lot. Like all the artists I've spoken to specifically have said like their biggest inspirations are in that anime aspect and in that like that's just what they grew up on. That's what they obsessed over. That's what they thought about for so long. So it's, I guess, even cool for them to be able to get like an anime edit or something of that sort and just be able to vibe their music with it.
Yeah. Like, and like a big one, for example, like Little Uzi Vert, like everything that he does has like that Japanese like anime flavor to it, like everything. So it's just super sick. So my next question for you is, are you watching any anime right now?
I have been trying to watch like older comedies. I haven't really been watching a lot of anime recently because with how much I work on Lofi.nites, I technically, for part of my job, like I'm blessed to have to watch anime for work. So like outside of that, I don't watch anime a lot only because I tend to do other things that I can't do when I'm working. But like I have been watching it's called it's like a band and they have an anime about their life, but it's like very short 2-3 minute episodes and it's called The Diary of Our Lives. So it's just an interesting take on definitely, I'm pretty sure it's a Japanese band and that's just them as anime and they're just doing their real life stuff instead of their band stuff. So I thought it was an interesting like meta take on that whole scenario, so I've been watching that.